£1,000 spent, and 3 weekends later, we finally have finished our dream garden shed project. Come along with us back to day one as we show you step by step how we completed this lovely shed. So here we have the plans for our 10-foot by 8-foot shed, which I drew myself by hand. Now, bearing in mind I have never done anything like this before, we soon discovered that there were a few small mistakes in measurements, but we quickly rectified these, and before long we were on the way to starting the shed.
What are these?
Well, they're lengths of 3x2, 3" by 2" timber, and I'm going to use it to make the frame for the shed, and then we'll put a felt liner on the outside to stop things from getting into the shed through the tongue and groove boards that we're putting on the outside. It'll stop condensation and stuff like that as well. And then we're going to put on the outside walls of the shed 19mm tongue and groove board, and it should look nice. And then depending on how well treated it is or how well it looks, I might either oil it or paint it, don't know. And then the roof is going to be tin, black box profile tin, I think. So that's the idea. Here we have our lengths of 3" by 2" timber that we were using to make our framework of the shed. We first measured them out in the size that we needed to do each wall. These first pieces were measured to 10 foot. I then cut them using my DeWalt chop saw, which came in really handy during this process. We used one piece that we'd cut to the exact measurements to then mark out the rest of the pieces. Once we had the line drawn, we simply cut down the centre of this line, and it gave us the exact same size piece every time. Once we had the pieces all cut to length, we then began the process of pre-boring the holes for the screws. This was definitely a worthwhile procedure because we found that when we were just boring the screws straight into the timber, it was quite often splitting the wood, so this was a very helpful tip. With the pieces cut and pre-drilled, we then laid out the wall on the floor, ready to be screwed together. Once we had the wall assembled, we soon discovered that it wasn't perfectly square, so we had to try and come up with a solution to rectify this. So we tried to brace the corners and then just loosen a few screws, and we then re-measured from point to point on each corner to make sure that the measurements were exactly the same. We then clamped it in position and re-screwed the screws that we had loosened, and this then helped us to bring the wall back into a more square position. So at this point we had our wall reasonably square. We had all of our upright pieces in. As you can see, this is actually two walls stacked on top of each other, so these are both the 10-foot long walls. And now that we have our uprights in, we were just adding in our supporting beams across the side. I think they're called arches or something like that. So we were just basically going along, screwing those in at a staggered pattern, so that obviously we were able to get the screws through from the side. And this just adds a bit of extra support to the shed and to the walls and gives it that bit more strength, especially in windy conditions and things like that. And they also come in handy as well for screwing things on, like brackets on the inside of your shed if you want to hang up tools and different other items. The screws that we used were 90mm long Torx head screws as well, which are really strong and probably the best option. At this point we had 3 of the 4 walls basically completed, apart from the apex piece that we need to form the roof. So it just gave us a brief idea of what the shed would look like in terms of size. Here you can see the apex piece that we built later on and added to the roof. At this stage we decided to start building the floor for the shed. We opted to use treated timber for this part, as the floor would be in some areas in contact with the ground, and this would help prevent rot. Once we had the frame of our floor constructed, we then started laying on the boards one by one and using the air compressor and the nail gun to just tack them on in place. We soon discovered, once we'd started, that we were a little bit short on timber, so we had to leave this to be finished for another day. We quickly discovered that this floor weighed an absolute ton when we tried to move it. The main reason for that was the timber we got was outside at the builders merchants and had absorbed a lot of water, so top tip, try and buy the wood that's been stored in a dry place if possible. Here you can see us trying to lay out the front wall of our shed, which will include the door and 2 windows. This made it a little bit more tricky to get the measurements right and the size of pieces that we needed right, because it did differ a little bit from the back wall. With all 4 walls now complete and the shed clamped in place temporarily, we used the air stapler gun to tack the felt in place.
What do you think, Max? Is it Maxi Waxy approved? It sure should be.
We then began to just go around quickly and cut out all the openings that we needed through the felt, for example the door and both windows.
Out through the window. Me? I'm Judah.
Do like the monkey, right turn Clyde. Once we had our felt finished and all of the openings cut out from the felt, we then began to lay on the first row of tongue and groove on each wall. It's important whenever you put on your first board to make sure that it's level, so that when you get to the top your wall isn't running off at an angle. As we got near the top of the wall, we found that we had a few planks that were slightly bowed, so we decided to stand the wall up. While my dad put a little bit of pressure on the board, I was then able to nail it into place. Once we had attached all of the tongue and groove boards to the shed, we then decided to put it together again temporarily, just to get a feel for the size of the shed. When we had it together, we decided to give it the first coat of Lardec oil. The next thing we needed was a door. Unfortunately, we hadn't got enough of the right size timber to complete the door, so fortunately I was able to use my old table saw to cut this piece to the exact size I needed. We decided to build the door in a typical Z frame pattern, which required a bit of measuring and some angled cuts on the saw. Once we had the frame made, it was just a case of going along and tacking on each board individually using the nail gun. For the windows, we purchased a sheet of Perspex. I believe it was around 4mm thick, and we then just measured this out to the size that we needed, and we used a piece of metal as a straight edge and cut along using the grinder. The oil that we decided to use on the shed is from a brand called Lardec, and it was recommended to me by a friend at work who's had it on his wooden fences for many years. It gives the shed a really nice rich colour. With the shed more or less complete, work began on preparing the site of the base in the garden. We first had to try and level the site by removing some of the topsoil and then replacing it with stone, before adding a final layer of old garden pavers to act as the base for our shed. Installation day finally came, and after a long journey of over an hour and a half up the motorway, the shed finally arrived, and thankfully all in one piece. Firstly, we got the base in position and made sure that it was nice and level and all square before we then proceeded to add further walls. As you can see here, it was all hands on deck, and we needed at least 3 people to try and keep the walls in place while one of us screwed the walls in. The last major part in this shed build was adding on the roof. For this, we chose to use black box profile non-drip tin, which I think gives the shed a more premium look. We also decided to add black trim around the doors and the windows. So, welcome to the shed. Come on in, let's have a look. So, as you can see, it's quite dull in here, but we come up with a little solution for the lights. As you can see up here, we have these batten lights. Now, I priced getting an electrician to wire in electricity to the shed, but it was just much too expensive. So we went on Amazon and we actually found these camping lights, and they're rechargeable batten lights. They last for many months, and they're really bright, as you can see. And they're handy because if you ever need a torch, you can literally just take them off the roof, and they're magnetic and they stick back up. So that was a really great solution for us in terms of getting light into the shed for working in the evenings or even in the winter. And over here I just basically set up a little tool station with all my screws and nuts and bolts and tools, and I just built this workbench out of leftover timber we had from the shed project. We also have all of our tools hung up on the wall just to try and save space. This shed is actually 10 feet long by 8 feet wide, and as you can see, we still have plenty of floor space here, plenty of room to move around, and that's what I really wanted whenever we built this shed. I didn't want to have to creep in and climb over things whenever I was trying to access the shed. So yeah, we have that, and then over this side we have sort of our gardening things and sort of paint and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm really into my fishing, so I wanted to have a nice big area where I could store all my fishing equipment nice and neatly, and that I could access anything I wanted quickly by just, you know, coming into the shed and taking it off the rack or off the wall. So yeah, the floor as well. One of the problems we realized after we built the shed was the floor planks were wet when we installed them, and as you can see now, between some of the floor planks there's some gaps. It's not the biggest problem, but it is a little bit annoying, whereas in other areas they're nice and tightly packed together. But it's one of the things with building sheds, we've never done it before. This was the first time we've ever done a project like this, and overall I think it turned out really well, but there will always be little things that you would do differently if you were to do it again. As you can see as well, we've got the non-drip tin roof, which is great. It's basically just like a little fleece lining on the inside of the tin, and that stops the condensation in the winter. So overall, we're really happy with how the shed turned out, and for two first-time shed builders, I think it was a good job. Let us know what you think in the comments and what you would have done differently, and we hope to see you sometime on YouTube, maybe building your own shed project. Until the next time, see you again soon.